are so hosed, all of us who follow this baseball franchise in any capacity, and I mean for all eternity. Good morning to you on that happy note. Good Tuesday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports, and this is Daily Shot of Pirates. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into football and or hockey, I also offer daily shots of Steelers and Penguins, the same place that you found this. When you watch Paul Skenes enjoy the scene at the All-Star game yesterday in Arlington, Texas, when you watch him pitch tonight in that opening inning against the top three hitters in the American League lineup, you're going to see him wearing that Pirates cap. And you're going to think, this is pretty cool. I could get used to this. For years, I've had to wait until the 8th or 9th inning to see if the obligatory Pittsburgh representative would even get an at-bat or maybe an inning in the field or something. And here's this kid. He's the star. He's the star. And he only just arrived. But then, because you're you and because you're all of us, to an extent, you're going to think about investment. And no, I don't just mean Bob Nutting's investment into Skenes heading into the future. I mean your own emotional investment. I've been picking on people for a few days now over this, saying, you're all worried about 2030. There's nothing else in your life that you worry about that's going to take place in the year 2030, up to and including buying a car, buying a home, getting married, having kids. None of that brings to mind, what about 2030? What's this going to be like in 2030? Because for the most part, we live our lives in the now. But not when it comes to the Pirates. Not when it comes to appreciating a player who's right there in front of your face wearing black and gold. And the reason for that, well, I wanted to look into it a little bit, okay? Because my stance isn't going to change here. I'm going to continue picking on people who do this because I find it to be ridiculous. However, let's try to at least uncover the why. In my eyes, it begins going way back with Barry Bonds. Everybody knew he was going to be out of here. Once his contract ran out after the 92 season, his MVP, Sid slid, and off Barry went to San Francisco because the poor, pitiful Pirates from the little village of Pittsburgh couldn't afford him. Flash forward, the payrolls get low here, the payrolls get high everywhere else, team gets sold, payroll situation gets even worse, stadium gets built, promises are broken, Aramis Ramirez gets sold off to pay off debt, and along comes the longest streak of losing seasons in the history of organized professional sports. But narrowing it down to the more recent, I point to a single player and a single situation for this, and that's Gerrit Cole. Not that I blame Cole. He was being grossly mismanaged here as a pitcher, never mind that he had and still has Scott Boras as an agent and was never going to stay in free agency. So 4 years into Cole's tenure, Neil Huntington trades him to Houston, gets almost nothing in return, and I say that, believe it or not, with respect to Joe Musgrove, who's turned out to be a wonderful pitcher and everything. It's just that he's not commensurate to Cole. The package was not commensurate to Cole. It wasn't close to that. So Cole was a great pitcher, or destined to be one. He was a number one overall. Your 200-inning, 200-strikeout horse that everybody'd been dreaming about here for a long time. Poof after 4 years. And I take no issue with anyone harboring any kind of ill will about that in one direction or the other, no matter how you happen to feel about Boras and the way he directs his clients. But here's the part that nobody talks about. He's it. He's your only example. In Bob Nutting's tenure as owner, he's your only example of a player the Pirates wanted to keep for the longer haul and didn't. Understand that the template here is to try to add on years of free agency after the 6 years in which you can already keep the player if you just happen to choose. The Pirates can, of course, do that with Skenes. They can keep him for 6 years unconditionally. So what your goal is with any such player is to try to buy out, that's their term, as many years of that player's free agency as possible. It's usually 1 or 2. It's very, very seldom more than that, but it does occasionally become that. If you look back over the past decade plus, the Pirates have signed to these types of contracts: Andrew McCutchen, Starling Marte, Gregory Polanco before Polanco messed up his shoulder and really just wasn't the same player again, but at the time it was seen as a really nice, welcome thing that the Pirates were signing a player of that potential to a longer-term deal. I'm going to throw in another one that everybody's forgotten, and for good reason, and that's Felipe Vasquez. And yes, the sooner he's forgotten in all of our lives, the better, but he also signed that type of extension with the team, of course, since then having been nullified because he was placed on the restricted list because he's a complete scumbag. Since then, since the Ben Cherington front office took over in 2020, Ke'Bryan Hayes was signed to that type of deal. Never mind what it is that you think of Hayes over the past month or over his career or whatever. The contract was signed, and when it was signed, it was almost universally applauded, per my recollection. It was seen as the first real indication that, hey, here's a player around whom Cherington plans to build. Next, and who among us can forget, the massive public push to get Brian Reynolds signed. All while Reynolds was going like all Ted Williams on the league for the opening 2 weeks of last season, and it was like, how can you let him go? You're evil, nutting, da-da-da-da, whatever else. And then what ends up happening, Reynolds got signed. Reynolds got signed for the very long term at the franchise's record financial terms. Who was next? Mitch Keller, all-star. Got to get him signed. Can't let guys like that go. Starting pitcher. Ace material. What happened this spring? Mitch got signed. Same type of deal. Carried into his years of free agency. Stayed within his prime, so you weren't paying him late into his 30s for past performance. You're paying for his peak years. And while I'm at it, this past spring, my understanding was that the team was going to approach David Bednar about something similar. Bednar, of course, had the injury. You never get into a long-term negotiation with somebody when they're hurt, and you don't like to carry it into the season, so it didn't happen. But how many more do you want? Which other players on this roster, the one you're looking at, would you have wanted them to have signed in the long term? And don't say O'Neal Cruz, because you know and I know everyone had to wait to see how his ankle's going to hold up. So tell me, please, where does all this victimhood originate? Give me the examples. Give me even one. You want to throw Jay Happ at me? I can do that because I was actually in communication with Happ's agent after the 2015 season, and I know for a fact that Happ and his side were looking to use the Pirates to build up the biggest possible offer they could get from the Blue Jays, who are owned by a phone company in Canada and have literally limitless resources. The Pirates did that. They went after Happ. They wanted Happ. Happ took that back to the Blue Jays, told them top this. They topped that. He signed. I'm not like your radio host guy who doesn't cover the team. I cover the team. I talk to these people. I talk to the agents. I know what actually happened with Happ, no pun intended. If you want to be sore about Cole for the rest of your life, go nuts. Otherwise, come up with more names for me. When we come back, J1Q. This portion of Daily Shot of Pirates is brought to you by our friends at North Shore Tavern, that's directly across Federal Street from PNC Park. It's home of Steak on a Stone, an eating experience, underscoring the word experience. The steak is brought to you partially cooked on an 800-degree stone, and you do the rest. It's a ton of fun, it's a great meal, and it's a baseball atmosphere like no other in Pittsburgh. North Shore Tavern, right across Federal Street from PNC Park. Today's J1Q comes from Bob, who says, DK, does it look like Ben Cherington was totally taken by surprise with Jared Jones, Mitch Keller, and Bailey Falter, and even Paul Skenes to an extent, having had the success that they've had this season? It's like he doesn't know what to do. He's being pressured to add a bat to jumpstart the offense, but he hadn't planned on the Pirates being a game and a half out of the wild card at the All-Star break. So now what does he do? Again, not part of his plan. You know what, Bob? I can't do that, man. I can't go there. Here's why. I can't say on one hand, well, you can't develop pitching, you can't acquire your own pitching, you can't scout professionally, you can't make any good trades, and then purposely brush off a handful of really positive examples. And I'm going to go through these. Jones is a second-round pick. That is a really, really, really good second-round pick, and that's to the credit of the people who scouted and developed the young man and moved him through the minors. That's a feather in their cap. There is no other way to paint that. There just isn't. Keller was, of course, drafted under the Neil Huntington front office, but Keller became an all-star under this group. Again, feather. You can go back and forth about who actually fixed him, who got him going, about that North Carolina pitching lab that had him throwing 100 and everything else here. For this conversation that we're having right now, feather. It's to their credit. There's no negative there. There's just none. Falter was acquired in a trade with the Phillies that sent Rodolfo Castro out. I'll bet not 1% of anybody listening to this remembered that, but there it was. Falter came for Castro. Falter wasn't awesome at the outset. Falter didn't have anything resembling good results in spring training. They stuck with him, and that's turned out to be a wonderful acquisition. And Skenes, I mean, I don't know what to say. I'm not going to go overboard with giving them credit for Skenes. He's a unicorn in every way. I also happen to believe that 30 out of 30 teams would have taken Skenes at number 1 overall in that draft. However, here he is, and he's dominating. And whatever plan they put into motion for him in terms of being really, really cautious coming up the minors and whatever else, can't say anything bad about it. You just can't. This is one reason why the only feedback that I ever get, now, I'm not talking about you here, I'm talking about in general, Bob, is whenever it all has to be in one direction or it all has to be in the other. Everything has to be in extremes, just like today's politics are. This isn't politics. This is baseball. And baseball's got all kinds of gray matter. The worst front office ever is going to make some good moves. The best and brightest smart office ever is going to have some clunkers. Right around the same time Huntington was making the worst trade ever in the Chris Archer fiasco, he picked up Brian Reynolds for Andrew McCutchen, as Kutch had begun his first steps downward. And the only way to look at it fairly, never mind to, intensely analyze it fairly, is to look at all parts of it, to give credit where it's due, to assign blame where it's due. I appreciate the question. I really do. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Pirates, and we're going to do another one of these tomorrow.